Joffe. I'm the director of the Hadassah-Brandeis Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Jewish Women and Religious Change in Israel and America. The HBI supports research on Jews and gender and Jewish women, and has a particular interest in the fascinating work and important work women are doing to affect religious change around the world. And this event came about because we have in residence at HBI and in the neighborhood two wonderful creative researchers who are looking at women who are affecting religious change in the state of Israel. And we've organized this panel so they can share their research and we can reflect on the relationship between work and innovation happening in Israel and work and innovation happening here in America. So we'll be hearing from researchers who are looking at a range of strategies, places where this innovation is happening in women's religious leadership, in prayer, in ritual, in organizing. And we'll hear about initiatives across the life cycle from a student perspective, from women who are young, are middle-aged, and women in older age about how they're affecting religious change in their life. And we're also going to be hearing about how this all happens across the denominations in both liberal movements and in Orthodoxy in both places. So the structure of the evening will be that we will hear the two central papers from our Israeli researchers, and then we'll be joined by two commentators. The first two researchers will stand here and give their talks with their slides so everyone can see them, and then the panel will all join them together to have a conversation. So we're going to start with Moria Dr. Moria who is here at HBI for the year as a scholar in residence. She is a recent recipient of her PhD from Ilan University in the Land of Israel and Archaeology department. Her dissertation looked at the work of Professor Alice Shalvi and her impact on women's status in Israeli society. Dr. Ran Ben-Hai has studied also at Bar-Ilan's Seminary for Women, the Midrasha for Women, and at Midrashet Lindenbaum, focusing on Talmud. She teaches at the Open University of Israel, and prior to that, she was a convener of a workshop on religious women and research, and taught at the Pelech High School for Girls in Tel Aviv. She is here for a year, working on a research project on Orthodox feminism in Israel and the US, looking at both Kolach and Joffe. So please welcome Dr. Ran Ben-Hai.
Hi, thank you. And thank you very much, Jonathan and Rita and Lisa, for this evening. I'm really, really excited. Okay. So, how Jewish women are challenging Israeli Orthodoxy. Shaktiel was elected to serve on Yerucham Religious Council in 1986. I was born then. Yeah. Okay, so she was elected, and Yerucham is a very far, small city. Who cares? She was elected. Well, the member of Knesset, Zvulun Hammer, did care, and he said no. And he claimed that women could not hold a religious position. So Shaktiel petitioned to the High Court of Justice, and she won. So 2 years later, she was the first to serve in religious council in Israel. In 2019, Shaktiel was ordained to the rabbinate in Rabbi Herzl Hafter's Beit Midrash. So even today, she's challenging Jewish Orthodoxy. However, even before the Supreme Court and even similar events and smaller events occurred, in 1975, Professor Alice Shalvi, became the principal of Pelech High School for Girls. It was ultra-Orthodox then, and now it's religious Zionist, but she decided that girls, her students, will learn Talmud to the Bahut, to the final exams, and whoever will teach them will be Beverly Graduates. And this was like a very non-common thing. And when it was stormed, parents threatened to take their girls out of the school, but Professor Joffe decided that she will continue, and as we'll see, everything it passed and everything is okay. And the results of this Shaktiel and Alice Joffe's acts and other acts of other women, of course, are far-reaching and influential to this day. It would be accurate to say that their acts in some ways became a process that we still see influential. For example, let's see, the Siyum Hashas, Daf Yomi, Siyum Hashas celebration. The Daf Yomi, the daily page, began in 1923 in Poland. It was obviously for men to learn one page of Babylonian Talmud every day for 7.5 years. And this year, very recently, we were able to celebrate, and I'm saying we because I celebrated from here in Maimonides. We were a group of religious women and men who celebrated by live stream from Israel also. And more than 3,000 women were in this event in Israel. So why are things like women being elected or serving in religious council in Israel or learning Talmud, teaching Talmud is challenging Jewish Orthodoxy in Israel? Why? So first I think we need to understand what is Orthodoxy in Israel. Okay, so beside the fact that Jewish Orthodoxy is the most conservative and traditional denomination of Judaism, it is also the institutional sect in Israel. It means that it actually affects on laws, that although the state of Israel is open for all Jews from all regions, and it's Jewish and democratic, it actually have only one way of performing the religious things, the Orthodox way. So rabbinical court, ordaining, marriage, divorce, burial, conversion, kashrut, everything is only the Orthodox way. So the chief rabbis, both the Sephardic and the Ashkenazi, are very ultra-Orthodox, as you can see, but the population is not that ultra-Orthodox. Okay, it's from 2014. It's not. It's very recent. So it doesn't necessarily represent the Jewish rabbi, and it doesn't necessarily represent the Jewish population in Israel. This had led to feminist actions and struggles, as we can see, as we shall see. In this lecture, I would like to ask those questions. I'm not promising the answers. You can guess on your own afterwards. But what is religious feminism? How do women challenge their traditional gender role? And like assisting aguna, is it a feminist act? I don't know. Maybe it's a social act. And is learning Talmud? Is reading Torah? What is feminism? So luckily for me, a few weeks ago, a questionnaire called Questionnaire for Religious Women in Israel, for religious women on religious feminism from Danit Menagem, was published in one of the Facebook groups named, it's a long name, just a sec. Let's see, I'm a religious feminist and I also don't have a sense of humor. In Hebrew, אני פמיניסטית דתייה, וגם אין לי חוש הומור. And the acronyms, yeah, it's a long name, I know. And the acronyms are fadlachushiyot. It's not the exact acronym, but it's very rare. It's very likely to say fadlachushiyot. Okay. So she was very calm, this student, and she shared the results with me. So of 16,000 members of the group, only 74 women replied this questionnaire. So it's not that representative questionnaire. I know, I'm sorry, but it brings up very important points. Okay, so the ages, as we can see, from the age of 15, observant women are very interested in their place in Judaism. But the funny thing was, on the post on Facebook, you could see the replies that women over 50 was very angry because they don't have place in the questionnaire. Okay, so we see that it has no limit. Okay, and appears to be two visible geographical centers, so Jerusalem and Gush Etzion, and Tel Aviv and Ramat Gan and Givat Shmuel, so the center of Israel. And of course, the periphery, we can see a little, I mean, it's just 74 women, I know, but we still can see that. In those places, in the central places, it's most likely to find egalitarian minions or partnership minions, and seminars for women, shiurei Torah for women, and the periphery, however, maybe they don't have Shira Hadashah, which is the most famous and pioneer partnership minion, but they do care about their aspects of Orthodox feminism in their life, and they do act for it. Okay. So there was a question: do you define yourself as a feminist? Well, of course, 70 women answered yes. Yeah, okay. Responding to the question, are there any issues in religion and Judaism that you think should improve in their attitude towards women? I didn't do the question. I mean, it's her question, so I'm sorry for. I just translated them. Okay, so we can see that 64 marked Aguna, and she had a list, so you could mark issues. Okay, so it's not their comments; it's just they marked it. So 64 Aguna, 62 women in leadership roles. Okay, you can see those numbers, and only one vote for women's status in the synagogue. I think this was my vote. Okay, and it's very, very different than the American Jewish Orthodoxy, right? Okay, so and it goes on to open questions, so I just brought those. So we can learn that the issues which women challenge Orthodoxy in Israel are related to status of women in front of the rabbinical establishment, women as religious leaders, women's Torah studies, and intimacy and sexuality. There are actually groups specific on that issue. Okay, lagat le'ehov, like to touch, to love, and everything. Like for Orthodoxy, men and women. Actually, it's very interesting. Okay. So now I wish I had time to demonstrate each issue. However, I'm offering just to take Facebook. Two Facebook groups who actually tackles all of those issues, okay, and bridges geographical locations, ages, and gender gaps. It allows the personal to become political. And a year and a half ago, a book named The New Religious Women was published by a journalist, Chen Al-Tisrol. And in her book, she reports changes. So it's a very important book, and I think it's an opening for academic work. Okay. The social network is excellent research tool for me. I mean, it has names, faces, of course. It has pictures, videos, dates, all day. It's a great tool for me. But before we're diving into Facebook, we really need to understand that women challenged Orthodoxy in Israel since the 70s, and I guess even before that, but especially since the 70s. And as we can see here, the timeline, we can see that Pnina Peli, and with her women's tefillah group in her own house, with her own Torah scroll that she had from her family, because no other but Knesset, no other synagogue would give her a scroll, of course. And in the 90s, we can see Toanot Rabbaniot, the rabbinical lawyers, who helped Agunot and other women in front of the rabbinical court. And Kolech was formed, which is the organization, the religious organization for women in Israel. Okay, so you can see them all, and then it leads to the Facebook. Let's see. 8 years ago, the Facebook group that we talked about earlier, I'm a religious feminist, and I also don't have a sense of humor. Okay, this is the picture. This is the profile picture of the group, and it revolves with a humor joke. Okay, it's like Shiloh Haken is a mitzvah. It's a commandment that our days, don't do it, okay? If you're hungry on the way and there is a nest, and inside the nest there is eggs and you want it, so you have to first, I don't know how, like, shoo the bird, the mother bird, and only then take the eggs. Never happened to me. So it's like a joke that when people ask, people anti-feminists ask on the group, oh, what's going on? Why do you want more commandments? Do what you need to do. Then they'll ask, oh, really? Did you do Shiloh Hakel already? Okay, so it's like a joke, and it became the symbol of the mustache, of course. Okay. So it's a public Facebook group, and it encourages sharing of events of members' private lives within the framework of religion. And I'm going to read just a sec. Okay, I know it's a lot of words. This is the group description. You don't have to. You can just listen. That's okay. In this place for women, it is a place for women to share events from their lives within the religion, a place where they can laugh at everything without justifying, without apologizing. Of course, it's a safe place, yes? In our home, we do not intend to engage in protection, not on our religious teeth, nor on our feminism. Skipping just... the women of the wall women should not apologize. But in this group, the LGBTQ community is especially the religious one, will be protected from attacks. So it's a safe place for all. It's a trans-denominational group, and all people can come and share their experience. And they don't seek for advice. They don't seek for halachic advice, of course not. And though the group is mostly Orthodox, the way of Judaism is not only Orthodox way. Okay, and men are welcome, but, let's see in the last paragraph, feminist men, you are definitely welcome here, but on one condition: do not take over the discourse. Okay, so... the group serves as a social change agent, and many aspects of religious female life are discussed there, such as tefillah, talit, tefillin, weddings, past high school experiences, or seminars. The trans-denominational group provides a safe place for a positive and negative experience of Jewish female, and even produce a unique humor. You should go scan there afterwards. I did a barcode there. You can scan and see her video, Rabbanit Bashvila. She's very funny. Okay, so around one of the arguments of head covering, one of the members felt attacked because she was pro head covering and halachically, and she was attacked because of that. So she went and started her own group. Let's see, halachic feminists. And I'm saying female there because feministiot is the female way to say it. Okay, so the halachic feminists, let's see, it has this description. Orthodox religious women with feminist consciousness and halachic commitment. So they are halachically committed, and allowing feminist men to participate. They allow it, yes. And in the discourse as equal, and see them as essential part of gospel someone help me here. Dismediation process. Okay. Let's see. The starting point. We're inside halacha. We don't let halacha to be beyond us, or to be far away from us, or not to be obligated to it. Moreover, we'll be happy if we can also reach operative actions and not just consciousness in religious Zionist community aspects. It's really important for them to actually practically change Jewish life. Our group is closed club, where women are exposed and talked openly, and protected space is necessary. Okay, so both groups Just a second. Starting point here is halacha, which is very different from the first one, and expectation is actually creating changes. So unlike the first group, which is like the second wave of feminism, right? Rising consciousness. The second group is actually seeking for halachically solutions and halachically practical solutions. So they don't want to give up their religious identity, and they don't want to give up their feminist identity. So they try to hold them together, and sometimes just to be upset about it together. Just a sec. The second group also have hierarchy of knowledge. It's not gender hierarchy, it's knowledge hierarchy. So Talmidot Chachamim and Talmidei Chachamim, like the Torah scholars for both genders, are respected there. They are honored there. So it's amazing to see how discussions are going on, and someone will write, just a second, let's see what Harabbanit Tirza Kelman, which we saw in the picture of Stigma Shas, will say about that. People actually eager to hear what the scholars have to say. Okay, so which issues are challenged on Facebook? There are many groups, as I said, and I'm talking about those two. So celebrating holidays. Can I read the Torah in Simchat Torah? Should I dance with the Torah scroll? How do I make women's Megillah reading? Okay, how do I do that? And sometimes it's question about masculine mitzvahs, commandments, such as 4 spices in Sukkot. Or should I sit in the sukkah and say the bracha, the blessing? Can I? Kiddush and Kaddish, orphans Kaddish. And sometimes it's about the synagogue, partnership minyan, egalitarian minyan, maybe just to lower the partition, I don't know. Let's talk about that. And sometimes it's about rituals as weddings, as Simchat Habat, when a girl is born, and then we'll all celebrate that. And those questions are, just a sec, also shaming for refusal husbands, for those who won't give a get, the certificate to their women, to the wives. And also sometimes the organization who helps those women inside the rabbinical court can say on Facebook, can you please come and protest here in this court? And women will come. Okay. So it is also coming to publish hair stories and Divrei Torah about Parashat Shavua. Okay, so in fact we can see that today every religious feminist issue are addressed in those social networks, and I think that the most significant challenge that women face in Orthodoxy is appeal the hierarchy of knowledge and halachic ruling after the revolution of women's Torah learning, combined with the growing social power, a new generation of knowledge, poskot halacha, knowledgeable poskot halacha, and activists were established. Facebook gives them a stage, and the religious establishment cannot silence or control their voices. So Leah Shakdiel, which we began with, has actually a very active profile on Facebook. Yes, she's protesting from there and publishing her tefillot and everything that she wants. But I will conclude with this, with the words of the Fadla Chushiot of this feminist group. Dvora Arush she's the founder of the Fadla Chushiot. For me, Facebook has another huge advantage. It is in every home, which is why it turns the traditional patriarchal order. The internet space allowed to women no longer, the internal space allowed to women no longer leads to detachment from the outside and from the centers of influence. You don't have to go out, find babysitter, study, do a PhD, travel far to find out who you are and what's important to you. You can connect from your own computer or phone and influence reality. I do it actually every night when I'm putting to sleep my son. I'm inside. I have a seat at the table. when I'm putting my son to sleep. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's an interesting perspective on the role of social media communities as a space for consciousness raising, and maybe as a space where practical actions, and also finding new halachic decisions and new sources for halachic decisions from alternative authorities. Our next speaker is Dr. Einat Libel-Hass, who is an anthropologist of religion and a historian. She is currently a postdoctoral fellow in the Sociology department at Ilan and a lecturer in the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies at Ashkelon Academic College. Her PhD was on the development of liberal, reform, and conservative Judaism in Tel Aviv, and it won the Shusterman Award for outstanding doctoral thesis. Her academic interests include cultural dynamics between Israel and the US, urban anthropology, liberal Judaism, and congregational studies. She has presented her work in many prestigious academic conferences and won the American Jewish Archives Fellowship to develop this work in 2017 and 2018. So we're very happy that she's sharing it with us today.
I'm really excited to be here today, and I want to thank Professor Sarna, Professor Weiss, Professor Fishbayn, and all the others. I'm sorry if I missed someone. I'm going to speak about the Jewish women in the Reform and Conservative settings in Israel, past, present, and personal. Okay. The Reform and the Conservative movements in Israel were established in the mid-60s and have promoted gender equality ever since. During this presentation, I will focus on active women in Reform congregation and in the Reform movement, since the Reform movement is the most liberal Jewish religious movement in Israel. And I will present the stories of the women who are active in it. Over the years, the composition of the liberal movements in Israel has changed dramatically. Initially, they were founded by American-speaking immigrants, and in time, Israeli-born families and individuals began to take part and even to take up rabbinical positions. My talk is based on an ethnographic fieldwork which I conducted in two congregations, Beit Daniel, you can see it in the slideshow, you can say the most well-known Israeli Reform synagogue in Israel. And it resides in Tel Aviv. It was established in 1991 by immigrants from English and German-speaking countries as the Reform movement's hub in the Tel Aviv area. From the very beginning, it functioned as both a synagogue and a community center, offering cultural and educational activities alongside religious services. And I also conducted an ethnographic fieldwork in a very small conservative congregation in Ramat Aviv, which was attended mainly by the people living in the neighborhood. In those congregations, I was especially interested in the role that women played in the life of the congregation. I discovered that in these congregations, the female members were affiliated with different generations, namely the founding generation, the 50 to 70 years old, and the 40-something years old. And I therefore analyzed their stories to uncover the developments in the status of women in this congregation. Now, the status of women in these two congregations may reflect the status of women in the general Reform and conservative movements in Israel. In addition to the active members, those congregations that I researched attracted women from the larger secular public due to the religious services that they provided. By religious services, I mean bar and bat mitzvah ceremonies and conversion courses, and Jewish classes. Throughout my talk, I will be incorporating quotes from both groups of women. And this is a very good friend of mine. This is Moria, and she represents the Beit Daniel founding women. The older women founders grew up in religious or ultra-Orthodox families. They joined the Reform congregation because they searched for some connection to tradition without being strictly observant. They wanted to provide their children with contemporary Jewish education. And they also emphasized, when I spoke with them, the importance of men and women sitting together, allowing the parents to sit together with their children in a family setting. And most of the founders also spoke especially about the wish to do a tikkun olam, to help the needy, as a motive to joining Beit Daniel and the Reform movement. And Moria Berish, she is the president of Beit Daniel until those days. She was born in Romania in 1931 and grew up in a Hasidic family of Vishnitz. She was already living in Israel in the early days of the state, and after her studies and all the wars, she gradually stopped being observant and adopted more liberal views. She immigrated to the US, where she met her husband, and then they came back to Israel in 1963 and joined the Reform movement to provide their son with a Jewish education. Therefore, they attended Friday night services as a family since he was 2. And another reason for her to join the congregation was her search for tradition. She said, "I realized I was missing the framework, the sense of belonging to a community, to a congregation." She now views Beit Daniel as her extended family. And she said, "Aside from my own loving family, I see the congregation as a family. When I was sick and grieving, I was happy to discover that the congregation to which I belong loves me and cares for me." Another reason for her ongoing activity is her desire to help others. She told me, "The interest I found in people and social work led me to be active in the Reform congregation." And in 1986 till 1991, she was not only the president of the congregation, but the volunteering head of all of the Reform movement in Israel. And also she was well known for her public promotion of the Reform movement, for her insistence to be a full-fledged member in the Tel Aviv Religious Council. Now, a religious council operates under the authority of the state and the chief rabbinate, and they didn't want to sit with Moria. So she appealed to the court together with the Reform movement a lot of times, and as you can see, there were newspapers that reported on her all along those years. Pertaining to her involvement in the congregation, like in many congregations, also in the Reform congregation, women are volunteering in charity work and preparing food, but Moria and the other founding members weren't satisfied with just with this female concept of religiosity. For them to take care of others, even besides the congregation, outside the congregation, aligns with the Reform Judaism commitment to pursue tikkun olam. Moria, for example, she told me a lot of times about those years before the first and the second Intifada, where she formed those summer camps for Arab and Jewish youth. And she's really exceptional in all of her involvement till those days for the Reform movement. I would now want to speak about the key active female members who are aged between 50 to 70. Most of them are middle class, and they have, of course, academic degrees. They immigrated to Israel from various places around the world, and they are in different stages in the family life cycle. So they have myriad of reasons to join the congregation. I would speak mainly about the joining the congregation because of the family. Judith Conforti, She was born in Israel in 1948. She's a history teacher, and she joined the congregation with her husband. The reasons why she joined the congregation is because her son turned bar mitzvah. And she represents a relatively minority, a very small minority of Israeli-born women who have joined the congregations, liberal congregations, because their children had turned bar mitzvah. She said to me, "We came in preparation for our son's bar mitzvah something like 18 years ago. My nephew has attended the bar mitzvah in Beit Daniel, the celebration, and said the entire family was sitting together. I thought we should check it out. And we've been here ever since." By the way, her daughter is also a female rabbi in Beit Daniel. She sometimes officiates in a bar and bat mitzvah. And Judith is also a very good example of a prime example of active women who volunteered in the congregation. Upon her retirement, she founded a social framework for the local elderly population, where she teaches about history and Judaism. So you can see that the commitment to Tikkun Olam, it goes like from generation to generation, pertaining to the women who are active in the congregation. And for her and for the other active members, the social activity, the Tikkun Olam, like the social action, you can say, Gemilut Chasadim, to take care of others, it's their expression of Judaism. And also there are active women in their 40s. And these women came to Beit Daniel for a very interesting forum. It was called the Young Forum for adults and students, designed to overcome a young Israel's disinclination to become involved in the Reform congregation. And they forged close ties with each other, and they remained in the congregation even after they became parents and had children. And also, when they were in this young forum, they participated in a lot of protests on behalf of the Reform movement on issues relating to state and religion. They joined the congregation in their 20s and 30s and speak about Judaism that suits the needs of a middle-class secular women in the 21st century and liken Reform Judaism to the internet. They said, "We serve wherever we want," meaning that there is no need to commit to just one single congregation and or to one single expression of one form of Judaism. Each of these women had tried several different social and spiritual religious options before selecting the Reform movement. You can say that their Judaism is the kind of Judaism that suits the needs of women who do not look for commitment. Now, individuals today are committed to so many communities, and educated women whose lives are mobile place greater emphasis on autonomy. The active women in Beit Daniel who joined it at their time when they were 20 and 30 emphasize that although their involvement in Beit Daniel is partial, it is meaningful to them. And they have a very interesting definition of religious identity. They are Reform secular identity, you can say. Some of them define themselves as secular women who are active in the Reform congregation. And Omrit, for example, she's 45, divorced, who works in finances. She said about her Jewish identity, "I'm secular, there is no religious aspect to my daily life. I view Judaism as a culture and have a positive affiliation with traditions, with holidays, with customs and rituals." She sometimes goes to the prayers, but to services, and because she's so secular in the eyes of all of her friends, they tend to ask her, "What are you looking for in a Reform congregation? If you just pray from time to time and you said you are so secular." And she told me like that, "People don't understand why a secular person attends synagogue. Obviously, I don't go to pray because I'm searching for a communicating with God. I enjoy the experiences. It lifts my spirit to sing certain songs to a certain tune. And she chose the term reform as an external label that would help others to understand what is her identity, like to help others even to digest her identity. Although her own perception of her Jewish identity is much more complex. Omrit and women like her combine secularity with Reform Judaism in order to explain how a secular woman can be active and pray from time to time in a Reform congregation. And one of the main, you can say, motives to be active in a Reform congregation is their commitment to social justice. This one was one of the main motives to join the Young Forum and to be identified as secular with the Reform movement. Omrit and other women believed in philanthropy and social justice, and they identified with those values. And this identification allowed them to be identified also as a Reform, instead of just being secular. It means that Beit Daniel provides a lot of avenues and options for these women to express their values, such as tolerance and equality between genders or humans in general. They had not been exposed, it's very important to understand that these women had not been exposed to religious education before they came to Beit Daniel. So for them, you can say, to be active in Tikkun Olam, in social justice, is their way to express their Judaism. And it reminds me a lot from what I've read in Cohen and Eisen book, The Jew Within, about unaffiliated young Americans that sometimes said Judaism for them is also doing volunteering and try to change the society. Now I would like to speak about the religious, you can say, consumers, women who are religious consumers. They celebrated their bar and bat mitzvah for their children in Beit Daniel. They came from the larger metropolitan, you can say. Tel Aviv is like the biggest city in central Israel. So they came from all around the Tel Aviv area. And then Naomi said, at the ceremony in the Reform synagogue, I was impressed by the fact that everyone sat together. Mothers could sit by their sons, by their daughters, instead of hiding upstairs behind curtains or need to move the curtains. I had a son and I want to celebrate with him. It's nice to do it together, it's fun. Revital, this is a very interesting habit in Beit Daniel. You hand the Sefer Torah from generation to generation, from the grandparents and grandmothers to the parents to the children, also including the sisters, of course. So it's very familiar. Also, Revital, her daughter, had a bat mitzvah in Beit Daniel. I have to say, a minority within the larger Israeli society, a minority of young daughters, who are turning 12, are having bat mitzvah, like a religious kind of bat mitzvah. Revital provided the following practical explanations for her choice to celebrate her daughter's bat mitzvah in Beit Daniel. When you want a girl to read from the Torah, you need to find a Reform synagogue, she added. Something new is being introduced into tradition and religion, the reforms. You can see above, this is a picture that was taken during one of the ceremonies in Beit Daniel, and of course a mother that tries to convey to her daughter the importance of gender equality. Parents who choose to celebrate their child's bar and bat mitzvah in Beit Daniel are going through a preparatory course, a preparation course. And only a small percentage of the Israeli mothers had celebrated any kind of bat mitzvah on their own when they were young. And it's important to understand, because they said to me that the preparation course is important to them due to the fact that during this course, for the first time in their life, they were exposed to donning a tefillin. Two women who is donning a tefillin. I know it's very common in the US, but in Israel, you hardly ever see it. And Daphne said, pertaining to this issue, it felt good to don tefillin for the first time in my life. I was excited to be in a religious framework that noticed me for the first time, unlike other frameworks that ignores me just because I am a woman. It is a tremendous contribution to the Jewish identity of girls. Her quote implies that for mothers and daughters, it's very meaningful and exciting for the first time ever to take an active part in a ritual that until those days in Israel is considered a male privilege. Moreover, the fact that a woman rabbi, you can see here, had instructed the participants how to don the tefillin rendered the rabbi, the female rabbi, as a role model for the bnot mitzvah and their mothers. I would now want to speak about Rabbi Galia Sadan as the religious and spiritual and congregation leader of Beit Daniel. She is the associate rabbi at Beit Daniel for the past 20 years, ever since she was ordained by the Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem. She runs the bar and bat mitzvah program and also the conversion school. She's officiating next to Rabbi Meir Azari, and she's the rabbi of 300 families. And Sadan is now the M של הבית דין שעושה את הגיור. I will say it in English. She is the Chief Justice of the Israeli Reform Movement's Beit Din, of the Conversion Court. And she said, pertaining to gender and about her family's views that shape her ties with the Reform Movement, she said, I would never have started my adventure with the Reform Movement had it not been a gendered equal movement. And she also said that the gender of the rabbi is still very important in many cases, especially when celebrating a bar mitzvah. This is the issue for the parents, not just for the kid. And she said to me in this context that there are parents who come from traditional backgrounds that hold common views, accepting gender segregation in the religious sphere. They come to Beit Daniel because they want to sit by the mother, and the father wants to sit together with the child, but still they want a man rabbi to officiate in the ceremony. So to them, it's extraordinarily, even inconceivable, that a woman rabbi would officiate in the ceremony. And she said, for them, says Sadan, she is like a cow with wings, like an alien. Okay, you can say. Yet, she said, she quoted what Rabbi Meir Azari, he's the senior rabbi of the congregation, told her. And I will read it. The more they see women rabbis, the more they will want them. Once, it's a personal matter. Once they will get to know you, they will want you. They will be happy when you will officiate at the ceremony. They will start to asking for you, and they won't care for what the grandpa says. In Hebrew, we say they won't care if what not just the grandpa, the grandmothers, and all the rest of the family will say. They will stick with the rabbi. And indeed, there have been many cases where families initially requested for male rabbi, but after getting to know Galia, agreed to have her officiate over their son's bar mitzvah. And to conclude, my talk was about active members in liberal movements in Israel versus women who just consume from time to time the religious services offered by a Reform congregation. The founding and the older active members in the congregations, and it doesn't matter if it's a Reform or conservative congregation, they describe their Jewish identity by using just one term, conservative or reform. In contrast to the 40-something years old who use more terms, combining them in very innovative ways to define their Jewish identity. This difference is an indication, maybe, of the generational gaps, which means that for women today, they enjoy freedom of forming their own Jewish identities that past generations didn't have or didn't take for themselves. Religious reform and conservative identities are broad and comprehensive. Thus, Israeli liberal congregation can contain different identities within themselves and appeals to women of various generations. And of course, they also offer the women who are active in them a lot of options to volunteer for the rest of society according to their own skills. My conversation with active women members in the congregations revealed that they connect to liberal Judaism through actions. Yeah, not through speaking, but to do. They are tachlis, we say in Hebrew. They are drawn to these congregations as places combining a commitment to social justice with philanthropy, namely tikkun olam. For them, this is, you can say, a very important part of Jewish identity. Now, unlike the members of the female members of the congregation, the women who only came to mark special occasions at Beit Daniel are religious consumers. They come to the congregation because it offers ceremonies that aligns with the secular lifestyle. Their experiences from those life-cycle celebrations strengthen their positive view of liberal Judaism, but they don't say that they are reform or conservative. After they finish to consume the specific religious service that brought them to this congregation, they terminate their contact with the congregation because the religious and identity-related needs of most secular Jews in Israel are met simply by living in the Jewish state. Thank you very much.
I'm Jonathan Sarna. I direct the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies, and really a pleasure to work with Lisa on this program. My job is to introduce our next two speakers. Before I do, I want to just make two small but I hope important points about the whole movement that we're talking about. First of all, this is really the first time that we see a development in Judaism that involves simultaneously Israel and the United States, and it's not unidirectional. It moves in both directions. Each influences the other. That's true in terms of the individuals. That's true in terms of the rituals. It's true in terms of the ideas. And we've not seen this before. So, for example, the Chavurah movement made a big impact on American Judaism. Its impact on Israel was almost nil. In this case, it really cannot be understood unless you see it as a dynamic movement involving both centers of Jewish life, and that's really tremendously important. The second point I wanted to make, simply because of where we are, is we should not forget the role of Brandeis University in many of these developments. It serves as an educator, as an agent of empowerment, as an incubator, as a funder, as a promoter. The Hadassah-Brandeis Institute, of course, has been centrally important, but I think that Brandeis broadly has served an important role and has for some years in terms of the whole role of women in Jewish life. And it's precisely for that reason that when we thought about this program, we thought, let's take advantage of our two wonderful scholarly guests from Israel, but let's also bring in the American and even the Brandeis dimension. So let me begin with a very significant person on the Brandeis campus, Rabbi Stephanie Sanger-Miller. She's the assistant director of Hillel here at Brandeis. In her second year, she was ordained here in Boston at the Hebrew College Rabbinical School. And to look at her bio is to understand the vast impact of Israel. Bina, the conservative yeshiva, Pardes, Shalom Hartman Institute, all are on her CV. Those are central Israeli institutions. The influence of those institutions brought back to Brandeis, just as the many she influences later go and have an impact on Israel. On the side, Rabbi Sanger-Miller had a whole career as a chef as well. And she got up at 4 in the morning in order to be with us, so thank you very much. And without further ado, Rabbi Sanger-Miller.
You make me sound like much more of a jet setter than I normally am. First of all, thank you so much to our wonderful presenters. It is a delight and a joy to learn with and from you, and to continue my sort of internal debate over whether or not we are all part of the same project or two entirely different projects in the United States and Israel. You know, you have these two youngish, headstrong nations trying to figure it out on our own still. And I think in both cases, we are getting there, but through very different means. During my time in Israel, I was particularly struck by organizations like Bina, where I worked, and my Alma, these wonderful organizations that are creating space for women in a way that feels both entirely new and unique, but also sort of sits right at the heart of what I sort of frequently joke is the original Judaism, which is secularism. You can laugh at the bad joke if you want, but you don't have to. But I was struck by these organizations and the fact that women were frequently at the helm. And I didn't quite know what to make of that until I looked at my own experience in the United States as a student at Hebrew College, a post-denominational, trans-denominational, multi-denominational, non-denominational, pick your adjective, rabbinical school. But being in a part of this movement of a non-movement, frequently helmed by women. If you look at many of the pluralistic or non-denominational or multi-denominational spaces in the United States, women are at the forefront, whether it's Hebrew College itself, whether it's Hillel's across the country. Women seem to be, once again, claiming spaces. And it's sort of an interesting thing because on the one hand in Israel it feels like it's a step inside. And in some ways in the United States it feels like a step out. But in either case, I keep flashing back to Daniel Reinharz's work in Unheroic Conduct, speaking about the way that women at some point were displaced from tents. The men needed them to study. And we had, to an extent, nowhere to go. So this, in one way or another, whether it's that we're staking out new territory or taking back a little bit, there is something at work here. The language that I frequently hear around this work is one of authenticity, which sometimes feels like a word that is almost meaningless. Authenticity meaning that we are meeting people where they are, that we are the first, that we are the only, that we are unique. I'm not really sure that aspect of it is the one that I find the most compelling. But as I was looking up the definition of authenticity to make sure I actually knew what the word meant, there was a second definition below it that I had never seen before in reference to sacred music. And it was one that said the authentic note is one that is somewhere between the highest and the lowest and relative to a note an octave above it. It is something that is always dynamic and in relationship. And so I wonder if that's actually the work that we are engaged in right now, one that is frequently transmitted through Facebook, that is frequently experienced whether through students who are going to Israel to study, students coming from Israel to the United States to study, travel groups, all of these different experiences, this level of mobility and discourse that we have never had before. I think that authenticity that is constantly in relationship, not relative in the sense of greater or lesser, but one that is reaching out, that is harmonizing, is the one that I find deeply compelling. And so to hear from the two of you about the work that is being done in Israel, that is creating space for women, whether stepping in or staking new territory, is such an asset to us as we continue in our work. And again, I am so grateful to learn from both of you.
And finally, last but not least, and then we hear from you, we wanted to get a student perspective. Students play a very important role on this campus, and I would say that our female students over the years have played a tremendously important role in Jewish life over the course of my many years at Brandeis. And not to speak of the fact that for a very long time, we have trained people who went on to be pioneers, female pioneers in American Judaism. This goes all the way back to the 1960s and 70s. So we're delighted to welcome Lily Schmidt-Swartz. She is a senior here at Brandeis. She majors in our department of Near Eastern and Judaic Studies. In the politics department, she minors in business. She's had aside from that remarkable group of studies, she's had a career both within an Orthodox day school for women in Los Angeles, but she's also worked in lots of different areas, deeply influenced by Professor Sylvia Barak Fishbayn, who it's always a joy to have with us, and look forward to your comments.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. I'm very happy to be here and to speak amongst amazing women. Obviously, I'm not an expert in Israeli feminism in Israel and Orthodox Israeli feminism, but as an American Orthodox Jew, I think I could speak to the experiences of many Orthodox women at Brandeis and also just generally in broader society. So a theme that I've noticed both in Moria's work and some of the things that I have picked up on is this theme of women needing to stay within a framework of halacha while also enacting change. From my own experience at Brandeis, a lot of women focus their energies on figuring out ways to make sure that women have inclusion at prayer service in whatever form that is, that women have some sort of halachic authority, and that there are high-level learning opportunities for women. So I have not really observed much radical change. It's mostly stuff that has been happening within a specific framework of halacha. And at my time, I actually spent a year in Israel at Midrash and Nishmat, and during my time there, I learned in the Beit Midrash amongst Yoatzot Halacha, which are women that have authority, halachic authority over matters relating to family purity. So at my time at Nishmat, I spoke to all these different women, and they expressed to me that they were very excited to have this halachic authority, but the more that I thought to myself, I realized that maybe these roles that are made within this very structured halachic framework are made out of some sort of compromise, that these women don't necessarily have full authority, but they're okay with that, and that's very interesting, and I find that very interesting in your work also, that's something that you mentioned, this limited power of women, and also just this need to also appeal to the expert consensus and also the larger Orthodox community while making these decisions. In Professor Joffe's class, we read a lot of Tamar Ross's work about how Orthodox women, when they enact change, they need to stick to this very tight framework of appealing to the expert consensus, and also by speaking to other Orthodox people in the community, and also infusing elements of God in their interpretation. So it's very difficult. There's a lot of structure, there's a lot of things that we need to follow. And even though women find themselves compromising within this traditional system, I have observed controversy among American Orthodox Jews, both at Brandeis and everywhere, about the various roles that women can take on, whether they can take on a role as a Yoatzei Halacha or even a Maharat. And from my experience, it seems very complicated to appeal to a community that is so divided, of people who don't necessarily agree on what a woman's role is. So overall, I feel a very deep sense of isolation in the Orthodox feminist struggle, that it's not so easy to connect to other feminist groups on campus, that it's not so easy to connect to other Jewish feminist groups for that matter. And it definitely is a struggle, but I definitely believe that we as Orthodox feminists should try to stick together and figure out ways to make things better. I have noticed a few challenges when I've attempted to engage with other feminist groups on campus. One of the main challenges that I observed was that because a lot of Orthodox feminists are very focused on very specific goals of figuring out ways to get women to have higher access of learning Torah, or have access to the Torah scroll at prayer service, or just very specific things, it becomes very difficult to have conversations with feminists who are almost seemingly radical. They have agendas that are about sexual liberation or smashing the patriarchy, which aren't necessarily things that Orthodox feminists feel that they need to do. So I often find myself just figuring out ways to bring my Orthodox Jewish identity to these spaces. And also, it's difficult to identify as an Orthodox Jew in these spaces because at college I've encountered a lot of feminist groups who also identify with other marginalized groups. And in that language, they regard Palestinians as a very marginalized group, and it becomes complicated because my identity is so closely entangled in Israel, and there's a lot of assumptions that are being made in those settings. So I either choose not to speak about Israel in those settings, or I have to clarify that I'm a good Jew with good Israel opinions. It's very complicated, and I don't think there's necessarily a solution, but I have a few thoughts, and I would love to share them with you guys. And thank you so much for having me.
And this is your chance to ask questions and engage with our speakers.
This is your chance. You've heard plenty from us. Questions, comments, please.
I wonder whether there was so little response to the survey in Israel because it doesn't matter to so many people.
I think they're just tired of answering the same questions all over again. I mean, for them, it's not new. For the student who made the survey, I guess it's very new and interesting and exciting, but for them it's like, okay, we're feminist, we're Orthodox, or we're Jewish, I don't know. We just don't need to do surveys anymore. I mean, we don't need to answer those questions again and again and again. Usually the conversations on the Facebook group, on this specific Facebook group, are very rich and long, but this time I think they were just a little tired.
So have there been other tabulations of other surveys then?
What is tabulation?
Other analyses of other surveys? You said they
Other surveys. Okay, I'm sorry. At the beginning of the group, there were a few surveys, and then around the book that I showed you, she also asked a lot of questions, and I think now they just don't want to advocate anymore that the fact that they're religious and feminist. That's okay.
Other questions?
And also, it was only for the women and not for the men. So part of it was
Maybe the microphone can go also to the audience. So why am I here? Better.
Who had the question?
Thank you. It's been quite interesting. And my question, I'm an anthropologist, so my question's for the anthropologist. And it's a question about ritual. And I mean, you're sort of looking at whether people believe or not, and do they want to have these bar mitzvah ceremonies or other rituals. But I'm curious, in the domain of social action, in the domain of tikkun olam, are you able to see certain ways in which the Jewish context is actually structuring a ritual understanding, a ritual practice that gives it more meaning than they might find if they could find another context to do tikkun olam?
Can you elaborate? You mean, if I may ask?
So is it structured, for example, are people, in fact, you mentioned music at one point, and really you only had 15 minutes to talk about something you've written a dissertation and other books on, but what I'm getting at is whether there's a certain structure in terms of the timing, in terms of the way an event is constructed when they are participating in tikkun olam, so that the, as one of the Israeli sociologists once wrote about sort of the background base of being a Jew, of doing this activity in a Jewish context, in a congregational context, in fact comes forth, that there's a certain structure to it, that there may be certain songs or prayers that begin and ended to give it structure, that there's a certain language, a certain reference to Torah that goes through it, that this is all part of the ritual experience, that anthropologists are not, that looking at this only as, are they Reform Jews, are they doing this, and are they identifying with belief and with a certain kind of ritual Jewish identity, but in other ways to just look at the other activities and how they're incorporating kind of as their background or their structure aspects of Judaism as part of this learning.
Okay, I hope you spoke and you shared with us. I think I can do without it, if I may. You shared a lot of very important insights, yeah, and I will try to answer to a few of your questions. First of all, if we speak about the prayer itself, and I would like to maybe to start from the building and from the architecture of the synagogue. On the walls, yeah, on each wall above there is like a sentence, yes, it sends a message to the praying congregation. One of them is tzedek tzedek tirdof, which means that you need to be active in tikkun olam, in social justice. Now, also the rabbis, yeah, they repeat again and again in their sermons this message that we need to be better human beings. We need to take care of the environment, you can say. We need to take care of each other. We need to pay more attention to the society. Yeah, I mean the society, not just our little families, but all the biggest Israeli society. And it keeps, like, it doesn't happen just once in a few months. It keeps going through all the ceremonies along the years. Now you can say it's humanistic perspective that they give to the prayer. Also, you can see among the heterogeneous population of the praying congregation, you can see an example of maybe of Tikkun Olam. What I mean is that part of the congregation, a very active part of the congregation are converts. Now sometimes they come not just from the elite of the society, but from a more lower middle class. You can say that the active women and maybe also the active men in the congregation, they treat those converts, as their equals. I would speak specifically about Filipino women who went through a conversion in the Reform congregation. Now they came to Israel first of all to be foreign workers, and then they met their Israeli husbands. Now in Israel, some of the people are not so tolerant to foreign workers, especially to women that came to Israel. They say all kinds of things. I won't repeat on those things, but those women, who met their Israeli husbands, are part of the congregation. Now they are not just part of the congregation during the conversion course, which takes something like a year, but they are like a constant part of the congregation. They form their own, of course, subgroup inside the congregation, but they are considering to being full-fledged members. And you can say that their assimilation, the assimilation of the Filipino women and the partnership, between the Filipino women and their Israeli husbands, their assimilation is through Beit Daniel, through the Reform movement. So you can see an expression of a special kind of social activism inside the congregation itself. And also, there is like many subcommittees within the congregation that take care of people in need, people who are, how do you say, ill. Now, if you are speaking, I'm not sure if I understood correctly, but if you speak about the language of the prayer itself, I'm not sure if this is the direction that you spoke.
No, I actually was thinking more about the way in which the events of the Tikkun Olam was.
You mean the events of the Tikkun Olam that they were part of? Yeah.
But maybe we can talk about it afterwards.
Why don't we open it up more, see if there are other questions?
Okay.
I'd just like to sorry to say, because that's such a marvelously interesting comment.
Yeah, of course.
So I think what you have in mind, I'm afraid I don't know your name, by ritual of Tikkun Olam. So is there a bracha that you say, blessed be, O God, King of the universe, who's commanded me to do Tikkun Olam? Before I go, right, for instance. The same way, by the way, in Orthodox halacha, there's discussions among poskim, how come you don't say a bracha before, say, giving charity? Here we have the rituals of Tikkun Olam. There's the same way we have a ritual of Kriyat Shema, there's a ritual of Tikkun Olam. Every Jew is commanded in Tikkun Olam. You must do 3 acts of Tikkun Olam a day. And you have to do one before 3 hours after sunrise, and you have to do one by the middle of the day, and you have to do one before sunset, or in between sunset and, 9 o'clock at night before you get sun. I think that's what you have in mind. So we can talk about, I don't think that such rituals exist. An interesting question is, could they exist to the extent to which our very category of ritual is defined so as to exclude ethics? I mean, I think this is such a large conversation, but in the study of religion, anthropology of religion, much of our category of ritual is precisely there to be a contrast to what we think of as ethics, even though in all sorts of societies and cultures, what people regard as profoundly ethical behavior, Western societies regard as merely ritual behavior. So this is such an interesting intervention of yours. And I just have to mention, our Brandeis colleague, Jonathan Krasner, has written a magnificent study of Tikkun Olam, the history of the idea of Tikkun Olam through American Jewry over the years. And I'd like to relinquish the microphone to just say I'd really hope and think to all of you, and I'd love to hear more from our undergraduate panelists. When you said you have more things to say, I'd love to hear more.
Can I just add one think you spoke, Professor Mirsky, you spoke about this greeting, about Tikkun Olam. Well, for my many years in the Reform congregations, and conservative, usually on the Friday night services, they don't say the exact greetings that you mentioned. And all the activities like going to protests about the relationship between the state and religion in Israel, they considered it, the 40-something years old, they considered it to be part of their Tikkun Olam.
But the question was, is it done differently because it's being done qua religious act as opposed to just, I vote for marriage?
Yeah. It's like the people. Sorry. The people are trying to do those things in the framework of the congregation. They don't do it like outside of the congregation. Thanks.
Other questions? Let me throw out this question of authenticity raised. The proposition that within the Orthodox realm, it comes back to Moria, Israel has served an enormously important role as a legitimator of activities by women. I am not sure that American Orthodox women would have done some of those things but for the legitimation provided by Israel. A few examples of that. For a long time, the partnership minyanim were literally known as Shira Hadasha style, as if Shira Hadasha gave it a hechsher, and that allowed it to continue. Or another, indeed, Avi Weiss said to me that had it not been for the smicha provided by Rav Sperber, Daniel Sperber, and his role, he doesn't think Maharat, which he founded, would have been able to do its job. So the existence of a great Israeli rabbi who lent his prestige to the cause made it possible. It even made it possible for them to fend off some of the American Orthodox rabbis who were, let's say, not as friendly as Rav Sperber to the enterprise. So to what extent did Israel serve as a legitimator? And of course, American Jewry served as the funder. Almost every one of the groups we've talked about and the institutions would not exist but for the funding provided by the United States. So as we begin to think about the role of the two communities, to what extent, just to start with those two, does Israel provide legitimation and America provide the funding?
The underlying question that I have is where the priority of Zionism feels really central in that, right? Like if the question is, if X innovation happens, will I still be able to make Aliyah? If that's part of the concern in there, then Israel kind of has to be the one that gives legitimacy. You don't need to worry about it if you're coming in the other direction. So I feel like that's somehow alive in there, and I don't know that it's unique to Orthodoxy. I think we sort of see that cross-denominationally. I think the where the innovation starts kind of bounces back and forth a little bit, but I feel like that's sort of the root cause that's sort of underneath it. The funding piece is interesting, as always.
we teach journalists to follow the money. It's actually good for scholars to follow the
No, I mean,
money.
there's something at work there. I'm not sure what yet. I generally leave the numbers to someone who's more skilled with them than I. But no, there is something in that dynamic that is both alive and real, and I'm not sure it's totally good in both cases of the legitimacy and the funding.
Well, I wonder if the funding shapes our understanding of what the most important issues facing Israeli feminists are. I think there's a sense, particularly, you talked about, Einat talked about the kind of tikkun olam work that women who are involved in the reform movement do, and a lot of that is funded by the Israel Religious Action Center of the reform movement that brings a lot of the important litigation that looks at creating a secular state, that looks at pushing back sex segregation in public life, that looks at opening up religious pluralism, particularly issues like if many people think about what the issues are in Israel, they might think of women of the wall and the struggle to be able to pray as they see fit at the Kotel. But that's a struggle that's funded by Americans. It's funded by the reform movement, and there's a tension within Women of the Wall about strategy because they serve both broader feminist purposes and the reform movement.
There are two women of this now, the original women of the wall and the other women of the wall, and they're not the same and they don't have the same goals.
And I think it's worth saying that it didn't start out as reform and it wasn't funded by reform. Women of the Wall started as mostly Orthodox women who wanted to be able to pray with a Torah scroll on their side of the Mechitza. And basically I will just say it, the movement has been hijacked by the reform movement and retained the name Women of the Wall, so that the original founders have to now call themselves the original Women of the Wall. And it is true that the current Women of the Wall is funded by the reform movement and is a tremendous propaganda tool of the reform movement, because it looks pretty horrible to have a woman who simply wants to pray being thrown into jail, which is what has happened more than once to the current leader, Einat Hoffman. But it's not, it shows you the complexity, that's what I would say,
Right. Well,
is that it goes back and forth, that institutions are important, but the reform movement is not the only institution. Kolech, a movement of Israeli women. Joffe, a movement of Orthodox women in the United States. Many institutions, not just the funding by the reform movement.
I think I said American, not reform.
Yeah, but it goes,
right,
but
yeah.
there's so
but
much
I want to say
fluidity.
one additional point to Professor Fishman, with my, of course, always agree on it, it's right, but
We're gonna get those
I think, and then we have at the back, and you're gonna get, let me just make one comment, which is,
So my comment is that while institutions shape our thinking, also like the ideas in our mind of what has been the institution shapes our feeling. And on that question of authenticity, I've wondered how these new forms of Judaism, or not new necessarily, but forms of Judaism that are seen as outside the norm, in terms of these egalitarian or feminist Orthodox versions and reform conservative movements, how do they feel in terms of how they handle the question of authenticity and what's authentically Jewish?
well, let me just finish what I was gonna say to Professor Fishman first, which is, I think there was a deliberate effort to say that the women's movement was reform. In other words, it's that confusion didn't come from heaven. That confusion was, and yes, some of it came from Israeli Amcha, which saw this, but some of it was a deliberate effort to make them reform and to taint them within the Israeli setting that way. What's interesting, and that's what I take to be some of the importance of Moria's work, is that it didn't really work. That is, one needs to understand, for those who don't, when you're called a reformi in Israel, it's not a compliment usually. And nevertheless, in spite of the effort to taint women's participation in Orthodoxy as reformi, your point is it didn't quite happen that way. And that's a really interesting dynamic. And it's interesting then to ask why at the wall, at the Kotel, it was hijacked, to use that word, and it may have something to do with the very different role that the Kotel plays in American Judaism and in Israeli Judaism. In terms of I don't want to take this over. Take others, right, on authenticity. But read Zev Elef's new book on authenticity, just out. Authentically Jewish is the name of it.
I wanted to say about the authenticity that inside Orthodoxy, when you find some Orthodox halachic source, it could be something historical like the Virgin from Betula Mizmir, and she was a rabbi and headed yeshiva, and I forgot her name, from Kurdistan. Like, if you find some source, it could be halachic source or historical source, you made it authentic again. So we redo it. We don't just do something new. And I wanted to say also, it's not only funding that comes from the United States, it also ideas and active women who came to Israel, who immigrated to Israel from the 70s. As I mentioned, Pnina Peli, and of course Tamar Ross, and lots of other, and my students from Tel Aviv, who most of them were feminist and some Anglo-Saxon region. So we have these ideas from an activist from the United States, and I think Israel brings back to the United States mostly the Limud Torah, the knowledge, I think. To speak about authenticity.
Yeah, Marisa spoke about authenticity in reform and conservative settings. Yeah, the people all the time, they're looking for authenticity, for this feeling inside themselves that they are doing the original thing. So I will speak a little bit about the conservative congregations that I researched. The rabbi tried all the time to make the people around him to feel this. So he used, you can say, New Age religiosity. He used the guitar and also singing all the time, and chanting, which are things that came from the New Age movement. And he tried to combine them with conservative prayers. And it really worked. People were fascinated. When he was in the congregation, this is Rabbi David Lazar, he's active also now in California. When he was there, a lot of people came. They were like Israeli-born, young families and students, and they really liked this combination, which caused them to feel authentic. Now, those days, all along the reform movement, you can hear more and more people who are singing Sephardic piyut, and who are studying Kabbalah inside the Reformed synagogue. They have those classes. How to find yourself inside Parashat HaShavua, the weekly portion of the Torah, in a Kabbalic manner. And they even, those days, they try to do an ensemble, a little group of women who, in Beit Daniel, who would be taught to sing Sephardic piyutim. Like there is a kind of a spirit of renewal, of authenticity among both conservative and reform congregations. And they try to combine it into the rituals that even the elders, like the very old founding members, could digest, because there is like a heterogeneous population inside the congregation. And the prayers are not just for the young adults, they are for everybody, for the old, for the middle-aged, for the young. So everything is done like gradually.
Hi, I have a question specifically for Lily. Hi, Lily. So something that you said when you were talking really resonated with me, the idea of being like a good Jew in feminist spaces. I mean, I'm not Orthodox, I'm secular, but I run into that all the time in secular feminist spaces, like feeling like I need to address the conflict in order to be authentic. So first of all, I just want to say I really applaud you for bringing that up here and for talking in front of your peers about issues that are happening at Brandeis. So could you speak more about your experience with having to be a good Jew in feminist spaces?
Yeah, sure. Oftentimes in these spaces, Israel is mentioned, and it's uncomfortable for me when there's a lot of talk about white Jews being oppressors almost in that same context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I never really know what to say because I'm not sure I can necessarily relate to these students who have a totally different idea of what is going on in Israel than I do. But I think the mature thing to do, and I think what I do is not necessarily the mature thing, because sometimes I just choose not to speak because I'm too uncomfortable. But I think what we should try to do as students and as a community is to speak about our complex histories as Jews, that we're not necessarily all white, that we're not necessarily all Zionists. And there's a lot of complexity and diversity among Jews, and we can relate to these other groups of people if we're just willing to have these bold conversations with one another. And I wish I was brave enough to do that, and I think that these are conversations that we need to have. Yeah.
I wonder if I could just add, so thank you for sharing that, and I think that's an important strategy as well, to, both locally and nationally to have those kind of brave conversations. I'm just inspired by that. I wonder if I could ask the other panelists, and maybe we can end with this, to what extent are Jewish feminists and religious feminists that you study engaged in the broader feminist movement, and what kind of challenges do they see in engaging with whatever feminism means to them in a broader sense?
What I can think of is around sexual harassment and attacks. Of course, they combine with, like in Israel, I know, in the United States, I don't know yet, but in Israel, sorry. So they combine forces around sexual arrests and harassments, and attacks. And in Israel, the Aguna issue is also secular feminism deal with it. So I don't know if it's not international feminism, yes, but it is helping at domestic violence, sexual harassment, and the marriage and divorce issues in Israel. These issues, I think, they combine forces.
The reform movement, from what I know, also that I should have said that there is a difference between the official leadership and the women. Like the women in the congregations, they'll hold so many different opinions that sometimes are completely different from the opinions of the leadership. Okay, it has to be said. The women themselves, of course, some of them are feminists, some of them are active in the general feminist circles. Some of them, of course, also are active in the Aguna. It happens that one of the participants in Beit Daniel is Leslie, who was the former Leslie Sachs, who was the former CEO of Women of the Wall, and she was also involved in Shdulat Hanashim, the women's lobby, and also she in the first phases of her career, of her public career, she also shared a lot of ideas and activities with Alice Shalvi. So you can see like the combinations between sometimes modern Orthodoxy and Reform Judaism through Leslie Sachs. And what can I say? There are, of course, you say the Israeli Action Center, the Rabbi Noah Satat and Einat Hoffman. Sometimes, of course, they are involved in other issues pertaining to feminism, and
they try to help as they can for the lawyers. And the women themselves in the congregations hold so many different ideas about what feminism is. It's sometimes different from what the leadership thinks, what the rabbi thinks, and sometimes their voices aren't heard in the publicity, in the news, and I try somehow to show also their voices and opinions. It's funny. I have Israeli citizenship, and when I was living there, I somehow got in touch with this couple from Boston who wanted me to marry them on the beach in Israel. And I thought, oh, my documentation feels awfully new, and this feels awfully risky. In the U.S., a female rabbi is at this point just like boring almost. I am not remarkable because I am a woman in the rabbinate and in a more liberal circle, certainly. It feels like women taking on religious leadership roles and the level of risk that they are taking on, particularly in Israel, and even here to a point, I think we're just used to it, is actually part of that broader feminist project to put yourself at risk of physical harm at the complicated, messy Women of the Wall protests. I was there for one of those by mistake. It was not a fun moment. To be on the beach sort of looking around for a cop that would somehow figure out that I was doing a wedding in Israel. Don't know how that would have happened, but I was nervous about it. I think just the idea of being a religious leader, a woman who cares about Judaism, a woman who is studying it, is kind of in and of itself the work of feminism. It's both exciting and scary to be a part of that project.
That's a great place to end. An exciting and scary project of Jewish
And
feminism.
considered, by the way, illegal in Israel to officiate in non-Orthodox marriages.
You go to jail.
Yeah, you can